by black box testing?
Okay, so a black box testing is requirement and specification. It does not depend on the internal path, core structure, and the software being implemented. Then black box testing does not need any code programming knowledge, and
Yeah.
so black box testing also we called as a input output testing, and the uh, closed box testing, functional testing.
Yeah.
So and also the black box testing, including the boundary value and features of the black box testing, like boundary value analysis, equivalence partitioning, then static partitioning, and decision table transition. So in boundary value analysis, here we take the two boundaries, like that we check the test the data between the boundary. For example, the boundary set is from A to B. So here we input the data at like A minus 1, A plus 1. And and for B value, we input the data like B minus 1, B plus 1. So after that, we move to the equivalence partitioning method. So as my convenient, I divided the equivalent partition in three types. In time one, we test the data in test cases. We give the one valid input and two invalid input in type 1. In type 2 method, we give only one valid input and two invalid input. For example, if I want to check the train number by inputting the train number, I want to search the train. So I just type the valid train number and search, and in second time I just put the invalid train number. So this is the type 2. And in type 3, here we do the Boolean search, like true or false condition, radio check buttons. So that is the black box testing, sir.
Yeah. Okay, great. So very detailed answer, and you have covered some of the black box test design techniques as well. So most of the answer is correct, but the last part that you have mentioned about the equivalence partitioning is something which confused me a little bit. But overall, your understanding about the black box testing is fine, that it doesn't require the knowledge of the internal working structure or the code of any application. You just test it as sort of something, a black box is there. Software is a black box for you. Don't know how internal workings are there for the software application. You provide the input and you verify the output, right? So you have covered that. In terms of equivalence partition, I got a bit confused there. So you mentioned a couple of inputs. That's absolutely fine for the equivalence partition, like the different input, positive, valid and invalid input that you will provide. But when we say equivalence partition, say, for example, there is a text box on a web page. So let's get an answer from you. So there is a text box on a web page, and that text box accepts numbers, only numbers like integers, and from 10 to 50. So what will be the equivalence partition for this particular field, the text box? How many partitions will be there?
So we just put the valid and we just check the data by using the putting the value like 10 to 15, no?
10 to 50, 50. Yeah.
10 to 15. So here we just put the value like 8, 9. So after that 51, 52, and in between 10 to 50 values. So here
that's
we
correct.
check by using this.
So so you have covered like boundary value analysis, right? So boundaries. So because the valid values are between 10 to 50. So 10 is the valid value, 50 is the valid value, right? So when you absolutely, your understanding about boundary value analysis is perfectly fine. So you test So you took the example of A to B, right? So you test A plus 1, A minus 1, B plus 1, B. So in the equivalence partition, so same example, 10 to 50. So 10 is the valid input, 50 is the valid input. So between any value between 10 to 50 are the valid values, right? So this is the valid partition, right? So from 10 to 50 is a valid partition. Anything above 50 is invalid partition. Anything below 10 is invalid partition, right? So now how many partitions are there in altogether?
Two.
Three. So two invalid. First
Okay,
invalid
one
is
valid.
less than 10, right? Second invalid is above 50. And third partition is the valid partition. So for a text field in any web page. So these are, like simple examples that once you put these examples in front of the interviewer, you will definitely get into the IT and testing. Okay. So rest all your understanding about boundary value analysis, boundary values is fine. Okay. In terms of equivalence partition, just think about the partition. So like if you go to shopping, okay, so shopping usually, say for example, there are many offers. So they say if you spend up to 500 you get 10% discount. If you spend from 500 to 2500 you get 20% discount, right? So these are some of the scenarios where you actually practically, when you are testing the application, you will apply these concepts to design your test cases. Otherwise, if you don't apply these black box test design techniques, you will end up randomly testing and you might miss some of the partition, right? So that's why these techniques are important. And partition like invalid, valid is the way we have just discussed. That's how you figure out. Okay. Any questions, any clarifications in this one?
No, sir.
You'll be able to explain this now perfectly fine. Like equivalence partitioning and BVA are the most widely used test design techniques, right? So it doesn't matter how much experience you gain in the software testing, these are the techniques you will always use for testing applications. So get your understanding absolutely correct in that sense. It will really help. Okay. All right. What is static testing?
Okay. So static testing, it is the verification process, and it is done at the initial stage of the software development life cycle, and it needs the code deployment. Here we do uh, before the code deployment, and the example of the static testing is the if developer design a code, and that code, after developing the code, the another developer check that code manually before executing that. So and also the test case and test plan, also the example of the static testing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the static testing.
Yeah, absolutely correct. So this is basically sort of, say for example, you are developing some software, okay, and software is not just piece of code, right? It's basically the whole process that's involved in that development life cycle, and that development life cycle produces code, release notes, lots of documentation, right? So when you start developing any software, there is documentation that starts, there are design discussions that happen, there is a requirement discussion. So if you're following agile, there'll be user stories which will require some acceptance criteria. So all those things, when during the analysis phase itself, when you do not actually execute the code, right, or right from the starting of the software development lifecycle, you start analyzing, you start reviewing the documents. If code has been written, so peer review happens, which is basically code review. So in the code review, say for example, you are writing Java code, right, or Python code, and within the Python code, when there is a peer review happening, happening, peer review is happening. In that, there is a variable that you have defined which you haven't used anywhere, right? So there are many coding practices that when other person who is looking at your code will be able to identify, and without executing. So just by meeting and discussing or reviewing, and there are many different types of review, like there will be formal review, informal review, and all those reviews and walkthroughs that happen have a different level of formality and informality. Okay, so these all things come into static testing, and your answer is absolutely correct. I just added few more things so that you can, add these examples. Basically, like you can add the example of coding or code review or peer review. What exactly happens in peer review, right? Somebody has written code, get some examples of what usually will happen in the peer review. Okay, what do you understand by dynamic testing? Again, related to static, what exactly is dynamic testing and when does it
Okay,
happen?
so dynamic testing is exactly opposite to the static testing. So in dynamic testing, there is a validation process, and after that, it is the latter stage of the software development life cycle. And for example, Word documents. So we install. So here the Word we install in our machine or the computer. So in that we check that initially we check that the software document is proper or not, the software information and all. So it is the part of the static testing. After that, installing the software, we launch it. So after the launch it properly in our device. So it is properly launched or not, and we open that software and check all the application, it is properly working or not, and all the features and functionality of that application. So it is the part of the dynamic testing.
That's absolutely correct. Yes. So I think you have covered the example of Word, like installing, launching, and that's the best way to answer any of the question. If you provide the examples with your questions as you have did for this one, it shows that you understand the concept and how that is basically applied in real scenarios. So that's absolutely correct. Try to include as many examples as you can, right? So, but this is absolutely correct answer, that you actually, launch the application, and then after launching the application, you do interact with the application to test and proceed. So that's good. What is integration testing?
Okay, so integration testing, it is the level of software testing where individual units are combined and tested to verify if they are working as per the requirement document. So basically, the test plan takes the data flow between the two features or modules of an application. Basically, integration testing divided into two types, that is incremental testing, integration testing, and non-incremental integration testing. Incremental integration testing again divided into two types, that is top-down approach and bottom-up approach. So in top-down approach, here we incrementally add the modules such that we just check the flow of data. That the added module is the child of previous module. So here we check the data flow between the parent child. So for example, in Gmail application, that is the compose, inbox, trash. So these are the child of the Gmail. So and in the bottom up approach, here we incrementally add the module such that um the that added module is the child of previous module, uh, child of previous parent module. So here we check in the bottom up approach, like we go to the descending here, and that is the non-incremental testing. It is the Big Bang method of testing. So here we just randomly pick any two features and check the data flow between them. So that is the, and also, for example, in Gmail application, if I want to say there is a two user of Gmail application, user A and user B. If I want to send hi to the user B. So by using compose mail, I send hi to the user B. So I just check that in inbox the hi message is received to the user B. So that is the integration testing.
Right. Yeah. So covered in lot detail. That's absolutely correct. You have covered the Big Bang approach, top down, bottom up with example, right? So overall, it's absolutely fine, depending on the examples that you have took. Try to refine it a little bit when it comes to, say, for example, when you are explaining the Big Bang approach, right? So Big Bang approach or Big Bang integration happens when all the modules are integrated at once, and then you basically test the integration, the integrated, or as you mentioned, like integration of two modules, you randomly, basically pick. Top down, bottom up, you have anyways covered with example of Gmail. So very, very detailed. And I think this shows that you have actually read about the integration testing and read along with the examples, so which is very, very good aspect of answering these sort of question. Now there will be like couple of feedback wherein you have to, the way you articulate your answer, the flow. Okay, so my feedback here is that you articulate it, or basically make the answer flow in such a way that it aligns, each statement of your answer aligns one after the other, right? So when you started with the types, then you cover all the types and then move on with the examples, right? So say for example what it is, then types, then within the types these are the examples, something like that, right? Apart from that, I think it's absolutely, I'm very satisfied with the answer. Okay.